What's your take on how things have changed? Was the 76 kind of the best of times for the press? Has it got better or worse in terms of the current crisis?
The conduct of finance has actually become a great deal more difficult and a great deal more complex.
I think that difficulty that we faced, that we faced in dealing with, in an understanding, has been overcome to one extent, but at the same time they've got much better at hiding things away. That's a real problem.
Business journalism is inevitably becoming more and more involved with what the hell is happening to modern capitalism. It's not quite what it was when several of our predecessors on the FT, Andrew Schonfield, wrote about modern capitalism in the 50s.
Capitalism is not a faith. It isn't a faith. And I think for a long time we thought it was a faith, and it would always therefore deliver. And I think that's what happened in those times of boom.
Now I think we are moving to an era where, I think John's right to say, we're seeing somewhat belatedly perhaps the professionalization of journalism as opposed to journalism as a trade. And I think again, probably on balance, that's going to be a positive, although it's going to involve, again, quite a change.
We like to think of ourselves as free and bohemian spirits, which is a nice thing to be, but increasingly if we want to lay claim to a real knowledge of what's going on and to make a living from it, I think that would be called into question. So knowledge, more and better training, especially for people who are writing about the economy and about business.
Economic history, financial history, seem to be missing from a lot of the coverage of the last 10 years.
Detailed knowledge is always going to be elsewhere, and it can now be fed into a centre, into a smaller group, a more dedicated group, a group that will, by its nature, be small because it will only be, there'll only be the funds to have a small group. So I think that is the way ahead. But at the same time, we have to ensure, therefore, that that hub of professional journalists is highly trained.
And again, I mean, this whole issue of, within the crisis, how do we discern the information overload that perhaps we're getting from the internet? Well, in a sense, that's always been the role of journalists, as the gatekeepers, as the people who take the vast flow of information. I mean, when I look at my Reuters terminal, just in terms of news stories, there's one every few seconds.
I think that we have been blessed by very good specialized journalism.
That John said about the idea that we've got better and better at the job of financial journalism. Why? Because I think we've made it more accessible. And one of the reasons we've made it more accessible is because Mrs. Smith of the Larches does draw people in, more people in, makes it much more accessible. We devote more pages to financial journalism than we ever did.
So it may well be that almost everybody would think this can't go on, the housing bubble can't go on, or the technological bubble can't go on. But no one can know. The Academy didn't know any more than journalism knew when it's going to happen and under what circumstances it's going to happen.
It was said in the Irish Times, it was said in the Irish Independent, it was said by all sorts of people, but that didn't mean that newspapers could do anything about it. I think that we try to very often suggest that newspapers, we see them as a kind of institution. We see the media as an institution, as if it's some kind of coherent, homogeneous whole, and we tend to see newspapers in the same fashion. And therefore, when things go down, we say, why didn't the papers sort that out for us, which is really impossible. All we are doing, and how many times do I hear myself and other journalists say this, doing this first rough draft of history. We are just following, I don't see how we can be, in a sense, responsible.
We're in a very different era. We're approaching one in which new technologies are changing both how we gather information, because we have more access to people who can tell us about things, and how we're going to distribute that information.
The squeezing of the press, I think clearly the press is being squeezed. Perhaps in the next 10, 15 years there won't be many papers left.
It's a serious problem for modern business journalism, is the way that editors and with the technology imprison journalists. And they think everything happens on the internet, but somehow or other things have got to get onto the internet, and that involves journalists getting outside, meeting people, finding out what's going on, developing relationships.
So the net is both a salvation, indeed it is the only salvation, and a danger for newspapers, but no one knows how that will go.
We really are in an era where we lack the sort of paradigm, for better or worse, that we've had for the past 20 years or even the past 50 years, how we understand the economy. Now, actually, it's harder than ever to say we do understand the economy, how it's going to develop, what caused or will cause crisis in the future. I think it's even more important that we retain that skepticism and that knowledge so that journalism in the future can really contribute both to that debate and to the sense that people, not just experts or traders, can be part of that debate on the future of journalism, on the future of the economy, in a sense, on the future of the way all of us and society evolve. So thank you very much for coming to this conference. We'll have an informal discussion in the same T-bar afterwards if you want to pursue these things. And I'm very grateful for this excellent panel and the contributions they've been able to make.